Distinguished delegates, welcome back from lunch. This afternoon, we open with item 4 on progress in implementing the current program of work, together with item 6 on development on a new program of work and the institutional arrangements on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention related to indigenous peoples and local communities. It is also my ambition to complete the first reading of Agenda Item 5 on Acknowledgement Management by 6 p.m. today. I hope you will support me with this task. I would like to request that parties to combine their views on Agenda Item 4 and 6 and to make a single intervention. I give the floor to Secretariat to introduce the document. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On item 4 regarding progress in the implementation of the priority task of the multi-year program of work on Article 8J and related provisions of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Conference of the Parties decided in Decision 1510 to keep under review the program of work as needed and to reprioritize elements and tasks in order to ensure a program of work that is supportive of a human rights-based approach and coherent with the priorities of the framework. The Conference of the Parties requests parties and other governments to report on the implementation of the current program of work and, once adopted, of a new program of work on Article 8J and other provisions of the conventions related to indigenous people and local communities, as well as on the application of the various voluntary guidelines and standards developed under the aegis of the working group and adopted by the Conference of the Party as appropriate in order to determine the progress made. The working group has therefore before it, for its consideration, an interim progress report, which is contained in CBD-WG8-12-3, prepared by the Secretariat on the basis of the information received covering progress made by parties towards IG Target 8, progress in mainstreaming Article 8J and related provision across the areas of the work of the Convention, and the participation of indigenous people and local communities in the work of the Convention. As this is an interim progress report, an updated progress report will be prepared for the subsidiary body on implementation to be considered at its 4th meeting. This agenda item does not contain a draft recommendation at this time. To ensure coherence in draft decisions on progress, a draft decision will be prepared for the consideration of the subsidiary body on implementation. On item 6, which is the development of a new program of work on Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention related to indigenous people and local community, aligned with the GBF, with the full and effective participation of indigenous people and local communities, and to continue the working group with the intention to decide at its 16th meeting on institutional arrangements and future model operandi for Article 8J and related provision of the Convention related to indigenous people and local communities. To assist the working group in this task, and as requested in paragraph 7 of Decision 1510, the Acting Executive Secretary has convened a meeting of the ad hoc technical expert group on a new program of work and institutional arrangements on Article 8J and other provision of the Convention related to indigenous people and local community, which took place in Manaus, Brazil, from the 11th to the 13th of July, 2023. The expert group elaborated possible element, tasks, and actors for a new program of work on the basis of Annexes 1 and 2 of the same decision, as well as the results of a peer review referred to in Recommendation 11/2 of the working group, and again ensuring alignment with the Global Biodiversity Framework. The expert group discussed the implication of each option for institutional arrangements and their modus operandi, taking into account, among other things, the rules of procedure for meeting of the bodies established under the Convention, the participation of indigenous people and local communities in the work of the Convention, and options contained in paragraph 9 of Decision 14.7, namely, as regards to establishing a subsidiary body on Article 8J and related provision with a mandate to provide advice to the Conference of the Parties, other subsidiary bodies, and subject to the approval, the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the respective protocols on matters that are relevant to indigenous people and local communities, and within, of course, the scope of the convention. Continuing the working group with a revised mandate within the framework, applying the enhanced participation mechanism used by the working group for the participation of representatives of indigenous people and local community as appropriate when addressing matters of direct relevance to these groups in the subsidiary body in order to ensure their effective participation and fully integrate them into the work of the convention. As provided in paragraph 10 of Decision 1510, the working group has before it the report of the expert group from its meeting of July 2023 to assist in its deliberation, which is made available as an information document CBD/AAJ ATEC 2023/1/3. The working group is expected to review this information and make recommendations focusing on elements and tasks of the new program of work, as well as institutional arrangements ensuring alignment with the Global Biodiversity Framework. As a basis for work, the working group has before it a note by the Secretariat titled Development of a New Program of Work and Institutional Arrangements on Article AJ and other provision of the conventions related to indigenous people and local communities, which is contained in document CBD/WG8j-12, which contain draft recommendation on the program of work on Article AJ and other provision of the convention and related to indigenous people and local communities, an option for institutional arrangements. Annex 1 contains the draft program of work on Article AJ and other provisions of the Convention on Biological Diversity related to indigenous people and local communities to 2050, which was reviewed by the ATEC, and Annex 2 contained the proposed modus operandi of the permanent subsidiary body and other provisions of the conventions based on the input of the ATEC. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Secretary. With this background information, I now open the floor for your interventions. I ask you once again to remind focus on any advice you have concerning item 4 on progress, and particularly on item 6, and based on the document before you, CBD/WG8j/12/5, on the new program of work and the institutional arrangements. Please provide your thought on both items. Priority will be given to regional statement. I remind you that the progress report, as usual practice, does not contain any recommendation, and that this document will be further considered at SBI 4 in the broader context of progress on the Global Biodiversity Framework and in light of the analysis of additional information received. I will take the first intervention from IPLC as we agree.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. The recognition of indigenous peoples and local communities' rights and contributions in the KMGBF marks a milestone towards a more equitable partnership for whole of society in matters of conservation, sustainable use, and benefit sharing. This is a result of the time immemorial efforts of indigenous peoples and local communities to nurture their relationship with nature and their territories, as well as long engagements in different mechanisms that recognize these contributions, such as in the CBD Working Group 8J. We welcome the continuing efforts to enhance spaces for voices of indigenous peoples and local communities to be heard. Regarding Agenda Item 4, IIFB recognizes the accomplishments under the Program of Work on Article 8J. Out of 17 tasks, 12 tasks are already implemented or ongoing implementation, and 4 tasks are still pending. IFB will present at SBI a deep assessment of the achievements to date. Regarding Agenda Item 6, IFB strongly supports the draft recommendations based on the report of the ATEG for the establishment of a subsidiary body on Article 8J and other provisions, embodying the same underlying principles and characteristics of the current working group on Article 8J. The working group has contributed deeply to the work of the Convention for more than 20 years. The new body will be key to implementing the KMGBF, particularly Section C, which recognizes the roles, rights, and contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities, and 8 targets that contain specific mentions to indigenous peoples and local communities, namely Goal C, Targets 1, 3, 5, 9, 13, 19, 21, and 22. In the decision text to establish the subsidiary body on Article 8 General and other provisions, IFB suggests switching the order of paragraph 6 and paragraph 7 to reflect that the paragraph on the establishment of the subsidiary body should come before the paragraph on the current practice of integrating issues related to traditional knowledge across the Convention, and that both actions are complementary. On Annex 1, IFB supports the adoption of the new program of work with some small text changes. IFB considers the following tasks as significantly contributing to the achievement of the KMGBF. The tasks related to conservation and restoration on developing guidelines for the implementation of Target 3, including on indigenous and traditional territories, as well as the development of a grievance and redress mechanism. The tasks related to sustainable use will contribute to the achievement of Targets 5 and 9 related to customary sustainable use. The tasks related to sharing of benefits from utilization of genetic resources, traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, and digital sequence information, which includes the development of a plan of action on these matters, will contribute to the implementation of Target 13 and Goal C. The tasks related to knowledge and culture will contribute to the implementation of Goal C, Targets 20 and 21, which refer to the access to traditional knowledge with respect to free, prior, and informed consent and the protection of traditional knowledge. The tasks related to implementation and monitoring progress will contribute to the implementation of the 4 traditional knowledge indicators. The tasks related to full and effective participation and human rights-based approach will be cross-cutting, but also particularly contribute to the implementation of Target 22. The tasks related to direct access to funding for biodiversity conservation by indigenous peoples and local communities actions will contribute to the implementation of Target 19. IFB also recognizes the need to prioritize tasks to support the KMGBF implementation for effective achievement by 2030. IFB supports Annex 2 on the modus operandi without changes. Our specific text proposals are attached in our statement. We call for party support for our proposals. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, IPLC. Now I give the floor to the first party, Democratic Republic of Congo. For each party, you will have only 3 minutes. So,
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la parole accordée. Mais à mon avis, il me semble qu'il y a eu un malentendu à ce niveau parce que j'ai cru comprendre que l'exception qui a été soulevée ici ne concernait que le point 2 de l'agenda et qui concernait les questions d'ordre organisationnel. Mais ce que je viens de constater ici, c'est que l'exception continue jusque sur les autres points. Donc je voudrais peut-être avoir un peu plus de clarification là-dessus. Qu'à cela ne tienne, comme j'ai encore la parole, je voudrais revenir sur, rappeler ce que nos ancêtres ont dit. Ils ont dit que le chien a 4 pattes, mais il suit un seul chemin. Et à mon humble avis, il nous sera difficile de travailler simultanément sur les deux points. Il y a un point, le point 4, qui traite sur les progrès accomplis dans la réalisation d'un ancien programme de travail. Le point 6 traite sur le nouveau programme de travail et des arrangements institutionnels. Traiter ces deux points de manière simultanée ne sera pas efficace et aussi ne permettra pas d'avoir des points de vue de manière assez intéressante. Pour cela, je sais qu'on court un peu plus derrière le temps, mais je suggère qu'on travaille point par point. Ce sont deux points qui ne sont pas concomitants. Il y a un point qui fait l'évaluation du travail passé et il y a un point qui programme le nouveau travail. Et surtout, il faut voir que c'est la question centrale de cette réunion, le point 6, qui concerne le nouveau programme de travail avec des nouveaux arrangements institutionnels qui nous demandent d'analyser bien les différentes options proposées en vue de tirer une conclusion qui s'impose. Donc, moi, je voudrais suggérer qu'on examine point par point pour nous permettre d'aller lentement, mais sûrement. Et nous pensons qu'on a quand même le temps pour analyser ces deux documents. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Let me consult with the secretary and back to you. Yeah. So, thank you, Democratic Republic of Congo, for your intervention. I think we already conducted item 2 in the morning. That time, since the majority of the party, they want to have a speed time to come into the item 6. So it's agreed that in the morning we combine both together because it's quite linked together. I think both items can be discussed together, not separate, and it's already adopted in the morning. I hope it will be helpful to you. Are you requesting the? Otherwise, we continue with the next speaker. Japan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Japan recognizes the importance and necessity of for engagement and effective participation of IPLCs to implement and achieve the targets of the Kunming-Montreal GBF. On the other hand, we also consider it is important to implement the Article 8J in a cost-effective manner. Therefore, Japan would like to propose to add subject to the availability of resources as needed to future recommendations. This is our statement for item 4. And I'd like to continue to our statement related to item 6. Japan would like to take this opportunity to thank the ARTEC members for their hard work and dedication. We have specific comments on both the draft elements of the new program of work and institutional arrangements on Article 8J and other provisions of the convention related to IPLCs contained in document CBD-WG8j-12/5. We understand and would like to take note that the ARTEC report concluded that the associated information, including traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, is not digital sequence information as stated in CBD-DSI ARTEC 2020/1/7, Annex 1, Paragraph 9. Regarding Element 3 of the draft program of work, sharing of benefits from the utilization of genetic resources, traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources and digital sequence information, the benefit sharing mechanism for DSI is still under consideration based on the decision 15/9. In this context, Japan would like to suggest that any recommendations related to DSI should be decided after the benefit sharing mechanism for DSI is agreed. Furthermore, Japan would like to request the Secretariat to provide further clarifications on the scope of the traditional knowledge associated with digital sequence information to have constructive discussions on this subject. Although Japan understands the importance of the full and effective participation of IPLCs, we are concerned about the additional resources may be required for the establishment of the subsidiary body on Article 8J. Although we would like to have clarifications on the divisions of roles among the existing subsidiary bodies with the new proposed subsidiary body on Article 8J to avoid any confusions, including the duplications among their scope of work. In terms of utilizing existing resources effectively, Japan would like to suggest reorganizing the existing institutions as needed while reviewing their roles and other relevant functions of the existing bodies if parties agree on the establishment of a new subsidiary body. Lastly, Japan considers that it is necessary to give further careful consideration before making any recommendations for establishment of the permanent subsidiary body on Article 8J. In this context, we recognize the needs for further information and clarifications on the proposed institutional arrangements to have constructive discussions, including expected frequency of meetings, timing, length, any cost implications, and an additional resource even if the overall cost requirement stays the same as stated in the document CBD-WG8j-12/5. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The time is a little bit over, but your proposal is very constructive. I think Secretariat had took note what you said. We'll be back to you at a later stage. Then I give the floor to next speaker, Russia Federation.
Спасибо, уважаемый господин председатель. Вы нас просите за 3 минуты изложить два пункта повестки дня вместо 6 минут. Постараемся, сконцентрируемся на 6-м пункте повестки дня. Мы поддерживаем все стороны, которые считают, что вопросы статьи 8J – это неотъемлемая часть конвенции и один из по-настоящему сквозных вопросов, которые должны пронизывать всю работу конвенции и поэтому быть максимально интегрированными во все имеющиеся структуры конвенции. Отмечаем большую работу, проделанную в рамках рабочей группы по статье 8J и соответствующим положениям. Рабочая группа подготовила много важных документов, которые могут продолжать быть использованы странами. Их значение полностью сохраняется и для использования при выполнении глобальной рамочной программы. В связи с этим поддерживаем разработку новой программы работ по данному направлению. Немножко о параграфах. В параграфе 4 проекта решений по 6-му пункту повестки дня в документе 5 мы с удивлением увидели перечень только нескольких задач из глобальной рамочной программы. Нам же казалось, что когда мы согласовывали глобальную рамочную программу, вопрос, связанный с LPLC и традиционными знаниями, это сквозной вопрос, имеющий отношение ко всем, без исключения, целям и задачам рамочной программы. Поэтому нам очень странно видеть здесь такой ограниченный перечень задач. Мы считаем, что это должно быть исключено, мы должны говорить о всей рамочной программе. В параграфе 2 предлагается представить отчетность о выполнении новой программы. Непонятно, в каком формате, когда, кому, как, в рамках национальных отчетов или это отдельная процедура. Нам четко надо это уточнить, чтобы страны знали, что они должны делать. Параграф 6. Мы считаем, это ключевой параграф этого документа. Мы полностью поддерживаем идею и стремление к полной интеграции вопросов коренных народов, традиционных знаний в работу имеющихся вспомогательных органов Конвенции, САПСТа и SBI. Считаем это основой для реального превращения вопросов AJ в сквозной вопрос в полной мере для выполнения глобальной рамочной программы. Считаем это принципиальным развитием данной тематики в рамках Конвенции. Эта необходимость четко прослеживается и в тексте новой программы работ, где много пунктов, которые отсылают к работе САПСТа и SBI. В связи с этим полагаем, что вопрос коренных народов, местных сообществ, традиционных знаний должен стать обязательным, постоянным пунктом повестки дня всех совещаний САПСТы и SBI. В связи с этим в параграф 6 после слов «inter alia» мы предлагаем внести следующее дополнение. Designating the standing agenda item at each meeting of the subsidiary bodies and ensuring that other agenda items on matters relevant to indigenous people and then as a text. We need to do this integration as a really key institutional move forward to make it a really integrated program and not making it a silo, which is the standalone body, which will be actually silencing this area. В связи с этим полагаем излишним создание отдельного дополнительного постоянного вспомогательного органа. Предлагаем исключить параграф 7 и, соответственно, приложение 2. В то же время необходимо усилить параграф 6, принять все необходимые меры для полной интеграции вопросов AJ в работу существующих вспомогательных органов и обеспечить полное, своевременное и реальное участие коренных народов в работе САПСТы и SBI при рассмотрении постоянно действующих пунктов повестки дня по вопросам WG8j. Письменные рекомендации мы представим в письменном виде. Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Russian, for your very constructive intervention. Since we agreed to combine this agenda, it's common practice for each party have 3 minutes. So I just want you to try your best to be more efficient. Thank you. So we move to the next speaker, Colombia.
Thank you, Mr. President. This statement is made on behalf of the Latin American and the Caribbean countries, GRULAC. We would like to thank the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity and the government of Switzerland for organization of this meeting and the documents for this session. Concerning item 6, GRULAC expressed support of the ad hoc open-ended intersessional working group on Article 8J and related provisions of the Convention, and its 12th meeting, and advance the fulfillment of the objectives entrusted by the COP15 about the new program of work and the possible institutional arrangements and future modus operandi for Article 8J and other provisions of the Convention, especially taking into consideration. First, we consider it essential to strengthen the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, in particular indigenous women and girls, in decision-making related to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use, as well as implementation at all scenarios established by the Convention on Biological Diversity, especially for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, including the different working groups and other expert groups related to the implementation and action-oriented, in line with relevant international obligations, including the Escazú Agreement, the Regional Agreement on Access to Information, Public Participation, and Justice in Environmental Matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. Second, we do believe it is necessary to strengthen the dialogue between the working group on Article 8J and SOBSTA to improve access to information, data, knowledge, and intercultural exchange with the full involvement of indigenous peoples and local communities from an early stage. Third, GRULAC wants to emphasize the importance of traditional land use, security of land tenure, and governance by indigenous peoples and local communities for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity as a foundation of the protection for traditional knowledge. Fourth, we reiterate the importance of the indicators proposed and constructed from the indigenous people and local communities on traditional knowledge to be incorporated to the monitoring framework of the GBF. GRULAC believes in a strong and collaborative partnerships in the implementation of the GBF and encourages indigenous people and local communities to develop indicators that are relevant for them, considering the importance of being integrated into official information systems and contributing to country reports on the progress of the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Fifth, GRULAC wants, in line with Goal D and Target 19 of the GBF, to reiterate the need to secure the means of implementation, especially mobilizing and substantially increase of financial resources, facilitating access to funding for biodiversity conservation by indigenous people and local communities, especially indigenous women and young people. Also considering the contribution of collective actions and exploring innovative financial mechanisms. Finally, Mr. Chair, we want to recall that the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund was ratified and launched at the 7th Assembly of the Global Environment Facility last August in Vancouver, and that, as a result of a proposal by the Latin American and Caribbean region, the GEF Assembly also adopted the target of allocation 20% of the resources from the GVF Fund for actions in indigenous territories as a recognition of the indispensable role of indigenous people and local communities on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. We believe this has been a major step forward, and we urge all parties, and in particular donor countries, to make all necessary efforts to ensure this goal is achieved. Thank you, Mr. President.
谢谢哥伦比亚。我也想提醒大家，这个区域代表是5分钟的发言，这也是通常的惯例。下一个发言是欧盟区域，欧盟。 Yes.
Muchas gracias, señor copresidente. Mi intervención es una intervención regional en nombre de la Unión Europea y sus 27 Estados miembros. Agradecemos a la Secretaría su informe provisional de progreso y todos los esfuerzos para facilitar la participación de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales en la labor del convenio y ayudar a las partes a facilitar su importante contribución a la conservación de la biodiversidad y el uso sostenible en su labor nacional. Sin embargo, aún queda mucho trabajo por hacer y en lo que respecta a la aplicación sobre el terreno del nuevo Marco Mundial para la Biodiversidad de Kunming-Montreal, será necesaria la representación y participación plena, equitativa, inclusiva, efectiva y con perspectiva de género de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Por lo que respecta al punto 6 del orden del día, la Unión Europea y sus Estados miembros agradecen a la Secretaría, al Grupo Especial de Expertos Técnicos sobre el artículo 8J y a las múltiples organizaciones de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales por su trabajo y contribuciones en el desarrollo de un nuevo programa de trabajo y arreglos institucionales relativos al artículo 8J y otras disposiciones del convenio relacionadas con los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. En general, apoyamos el proyecto de recomendaciones y sus anexos como aparecen recogidas en el documento 12/5. El proyecto de nuevo programa de trabajo establecido en el anexo 1 del documento es ambicioso y completo y está bien estructurado. Y por lo tanto apoyamos en general los objetivos, principios generales, elementos y tareas que propone. Sin embargo, existen algunas cuestiones a nivel general a considerar y aclarar con cierto grado de detalle. Dado que el cronograma para el nuevo programa de trabajo está establecido hasta 2050, se debe reflejar el cronograma hasta 2030 para dar coherencia con el marco global. Y se deben identificar las prioridades más urgentes para los próximos 2 años. Como parte de dicha priorización, por ejemplo, será importante priorizar y racionalizar el número de tareas que propongan el desarrollo de nuevas directrices, sujeto a la disponibilidad de recursos. Si bien el grupo de trabajo ha realizado esfuerzos sustanciales para definir quiénes son los actores responsables de cada tarea, muchas tareas no identifican un actor responsable. Las acciones tendrían que estar alineadas con el marco global ya que el programa de trabajo está designado a ayudar a alcanzar sus objetivos. Proponemos incluir en el programa de trabajo la importancia de los NBSAPs y de las políticas climáticas y los NBSAPs para salvaguardar el conocimiento tradicional y apoyar iniciativas lideradas por pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, así como referencias más explícitas al papel de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales en relación con ciertos objetivos del marco. Considerando que en muchos foros se está llevando a cabo debates sobre la movilización de recursos, sugerimos reformular la propuesta de las tareas relacionadas, seguir el trabajo del Comité Asesor sobre movilización de recursos y facilitar la integración del debate en curso sobre cómo garantizar la financiación en el terreno, lo cual no se trata solo de nuevos mecanismos de financiación, sino principalmente de las condiciones para el acceso a dicha financiación y de cómo se formulan las prioridades y requisitos de los financiadores para aumentar la accesibilidad de las iniciativas lideradas por los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Por último, la Unión Europea y sus Estados miembros apoyan en principio el establecimiento de un órgano subsidiario sobre el artículo 8J y otras disposiciones del convenio. Sin embargo, se necesita más información sobre las disposiciones institucionales para explicar y aclarar plenamente aspectos como la relación coste-efectividad de la propuesta, incluida la opción de crear una mesa independiente y la propuesta de rotar sistemáticamente los lugares de reunión. También se necesitan más aclaraciones y análisis sobre las diferentes formas y opciones de la mesa y sus implicaciones administrativas, incluso en lo que respecta a garantizar el compromiso y la participación plena y efectiva de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Para finalizar, la Unión Europea y sus Estados miembros agradecen la coordinación previa con el Foro Indígena Internacional para la Biodiversidad y confirma que nuestras propuestas de cambio para el programa de trabajo ya han incluido numerosas propuestas que coinciden con las realizadas por el Fondo Indígena. Proporcionamos nuestras propuestas de enmienda por escrito. Muchas gracias, señor copresidente.
Thank you, EU and its member states is also very constructive. The Secretary will be back to your question later on. But your intervention is 8 minutes, 8.5 minutes. So next is Guatemala. You have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente. En primer lugar, como país, agradecemos los esfuerzos de la Secretaría, ya que hemos sido testigos de la enorme labor que han realizado a lo largo de estos años, por tener documentos y propuestas sólidas de trabajo. Asimismo, agradecemos el trabajo realizado por el grupo de expertos técnicos en Manaus, Brasil. En ese sentido, quiero referirme al documento CBD-WG8j-12-5. Guatemala, país megadiverso por su gran riqueza natural y por los conocimientos de los pueblos indígenas que lo habitan, posee una alta obligación de potenciar la participación plena y efectiva de todos los actores y sectores de la población, especialmente pueblos indígenas, mujeres, juventud y niñez. Como país, acogemos con beneplácito que la propuesta de decisiones y anexos es bastante completa. Sin embargo, queremos proponer la inclusión de una nueva tarea en el elemento de trabajo número 6 del anexo 1. El elemento se denomina participación plena y efectiva de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. En ese sentido, estamos planteando adicionar la tarea 6.3 que diría: realizar con el apoyo de la Secretaría Ejecutiva del CDB un análisis jurídico y político para implementar las recomendaciones de los 3 órganos de Naciones Unidas sobre Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas. 2 puntos. Foro Permanente sobre Cuestiones Indígenas de Naciones Unidas, Relator Especial sobre Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas y el Mecanismo Especial sobre Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas, relacionado al tratamiento diferenciado de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. Asimismo, consideramos que las sugerencias de modificación formuladas por el Foro Indígena sobre Biodiversidad son pertinentes, ya que nos ayudan a enfatizar algunos elementos del nuevo programa de trabajo sobre el artículo 8J. En ese sentido, apoyamos las propuestas de modificación presentadas. Haremos llegar nuestra propuesta de adición por escrito. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Guatemala, for your very constructive intervention. Also, you keep the time very well. Now, next speaker is Canada.
Thank you, Chair, and we'll focus our comment on item 6. The Government of Canada is committed to supporting the full and effective participation of Indigenous people in the implementation of the CBD. This agenda item represents an opportunity for all parties to renew their commitments to Article 8J and recognize the importance and value of Indigenous people in the CBD and the relationship and unique perspective they maintain vis-à-vis biodiversity and its conservation and sustainable use. This renewed commitment is of particular importance to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework that has made strong commitments and advance towards acknowledging the contribution of Indigenous people to achieve CBD objectives. The commitments that were made at COP15, including strong commitments to strengthen our partnership with the Indigenous people, as reflected in numerous places in the KMGBF. And that at that time, we all recognize that meaningful implementation of the framework will necessarily require enhanced participation of Indigenous people and ongoing efforts by the Working Group on 8J. Canada therefore strongly supports the creation of a permanent subsidiary body in order to support integration of future works on matters related to Indigenous people across the work of the Convention, as well as for advancing the effective participation of Indigenous people in the implementation of the CBD. Establishing the Working Group on 8J as a subsidiary body will enable the implementation of numerous elements related to IPLCs, customary sustainable use, and traditional knowledge highlighted, agreed upon, and prioritized by party in the KMGBF. No other body in the CBD family has a clear role to carry out this work. Parties have become accustomed to the work of the Working Group on 8J and see that it fills an important gap. Establishing the subsidiary body with a focus on a program of work aligned with the KMGBF should allow the other bodies of the Convention to focus on their specific task and allow the subsidiary body on the Working Group on 8J to focus on providing its unique perspective in the work of the Convention. We look forward to working with others to ensure that the recommended decision to COP on this matter addresses concern and ensure a strong and effective subsidiary body on 8J. In regards to the proposed new program of work, Canada supports a program of work that is focused and directly aligned with the level of ambition, timelines, and priorities set out in the KMGBF. We look forward to working with others to focus and streamline the proposed new program of work to address elements that are the most directly related to the implementation of the KMGBF, avoiding duplication of tasks and efforts, and limiting its tasks to 2023-2030 timeline. We have some proposed changes to the decision and the annexes to ensure its this alignment, and we'll share these suggestions in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada, also for your very concrete advice. Now I give the floor to Australia. It's working.
Thank you, Chair. On Agenda Item 4, Australia welcomes the report on the progress in the implementation of the priority tasks of the multi-year program of work on Article 8J and related provisions. The work done by this working group and the Convention more broadly has been extensive and valuable, and as we move to discuss a new program of work, Australia looks forward to aligning any further work with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. On the new proposed program of work under Item 6, Australia is generally supportive and believes a high priority of any new work under Article 8J and in general needs to ensure efforts are aligned with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe that the current draft program of work needs additional work to ensure it's practicable and can be effectively implemented. For example, the tasks below each element in the program of work must be action-oriented, must explicitly identify the responsible actors, and must identify timeframes for implementation. Priorities need to be determined for at least the next 2 years, with broader priorities which extend out to 2030 established. The 2050 timeframe is unrealistic. The program of work timeline should align with the 2030 targets within the Global Biodiversity Framework. Many elements and actions within the program of work could benefit from assistance of other United Nations agencies and programs, taking into account the relevant mandates, of course. It must be ensured that the language used throughout is consistent with the adopted Article 8J glossary and that the actions are within the mandate and scope of the working group and the articles of the Convention. We would also seek to keep any reference to digital sequence information in brackets so as to not preempt discussions on this topic next week and throughout the intersessional period. On the institutional arrangements for this working group, Australia recognises the essential role of Indigenous peoples and local communities in the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. Their traditional knowledge, innovations and practices are integral to the work that we do in this forum and in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and national biodiversity strategies and action plans. As such, Australia supports the establishment of a subsidiary body on Article 8J and related provisions. We believe establishing the subsidiary body further opportunities to respect, preserve and maintain the knowledge, innovations and practices of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We would therefore like to propose that the subsidiary body operates under the same co-chairing arrangements as the working group. This includes that the co-chair representing the Indigenous peoples and local communities is elected by the International Indigenous Forum for Biodiversity as the caucus representing the interests of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Australia further believes it is necessary that the subsidiary body is able to convene ad hoc expert working groups to provide evidence-based and culturally sensitive advice. We would therefore like to propose the addition of a paragraph mirroring provisions under the other subsidiary bodies of the Convention, allowing for the establishment of such technical groups. We will submit our proposed amendments on the proposed program of work to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia, for your concrete proposal. Next speaker is the Democratic Republic of Congo. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la parole accordée. En fait, la République démocratique du Congo tient à remercier le secrétariat pour le travail fourni en vue de rendre disponibles les deux documents sous analyse. S'agissant du point 4, la RDC reconnaît les progrès accomplis spécifiquement par les peuples autochtones et les communautés locales dans la réalisation du programme de travail sur l'article 8J, lequel travail, du reste louable, a permis, comme l'a souligné Monsieur le secrétaire exécutif par intérim de la CDB ce matin, Monsieur David Cooper, de placer la contribution des peuples autochtones et des communautés locales sur les projecteurs. Aujourd'hui, les peuples autochtones et les communautés locales qui étaient les sans-voix d'hier ont une voix, et une voix qui crie plus fort. Cela a permis notamment de reconnaître leur rôle dans la conservation de la biodiversité et l'utilisation durable de ces éléments, notamment dans le cadre mondial de la biodiversité Kunming-Montréal. Pour cela, la République démocratique du Congo a adopté une loi spéciale portant protection et promotion des peuples autochtones et des communautés locales. Par ailleurs, la RDC a également accompagné les peuples autochtones et les communautés locales à s'organiser en une plateforme de concertation au niveau national sur la biodiversité. Au sujet du point 6, la République démocratique du Congo souligne qu'on ne peut pas couper un arbre qui porte des fruits. Bien au contraire, on doit plutôt y mettre beaucoup d'engrais, organiques bien sûr, pour qu'ils produisent encore plus de fruits que par le passé. Selon les règles en vigueur, les groupes de travail sont établis sur une thématique spécifique et sont appelés à disparaître une fois la thématique épuisée. Tel a été récemment le cas du groupe de travail sur le cadre mondial de la biodiversité Kunming-Montréal, lequel groupe n'existe plus. Par contre, l'organe subsidiaire est établi sur une base permanente. Tel est le cas actuellement de l'organe subsidiaire chargé de fournir les avis techniques, scientifiques et technologiques et de l'organe subsidiaire chargé de la mise en œuvre. La République démocratique du Congo soutiendrait la création d'un organe subsidiaire sur l'article 8J afin d'être formellement établi pour éviter que ce groupe de travail ne vienne à disparaître un jour. Cependant, pour conclure, la République démocratique du Congo se demande si jusqu'à présent, par exemple, le SBI n'est pas établi dans le texte de la Convention et qu'on arrive à créer un autre groupe, organe subsidiaire qui, justement, ne sera pas encore aussi reconnu dans les textes de la Convention. Comment prendre en charge ces questions à l'état actuel? Je vous remercie.
Thank you for your intervention. Now I invite next speaker, South Africa.
Thank you very much, Chair. With regard to item 4 on progress in the implementation, South Africa has promulgated in August 2019 a legislation on protection, promotion, development, and management of indigenous knowledge. The legislation provides for the recognition of prior learning of indigenous knowledge practitioners. And in this regard, as government, we are working with relevant stakeholders to address issues of indigenous astronomy. We are also working with experts to develop norms and standards for indigenous astronomy for the certification of practitioners in this discipline. Furthermore, in 2019, the world's first industry-wide benefit sharing agreement was launched in South Africa between the Khoikhoi and the San and the South African rooibos industry. The agreement recognizes the Khoi and San peoples as the traditional knowledge holders to the uses of rooibos, an indigenous plant species found only in the Kattenberg region of South Africa. The agreement is the basis for which the Khoi and the San communities of South Africa will have access to benefits as a percentage contribution from the commercialization of rooibos by the South African rooibos industry. An international indigenous astronomy conference was held in July 2022 with the aim of contributing to understanding the value of astronomy, advocacy, and communication programs to improve research and methodologies. Indigenous mining has also been identified as other discipline that will assist in identifying indigenous technologies in the communities. Smart Village Project seeks to use indigenous technologies in coming up with smart villages. Embedded in the project is indigenous architectures using indigenous technologies. Communities are also being assisted in developing their biocultural community protocols. They also share in the indigenous technologies used in adapting to climate change and mitigating its impacts. A white paper on the conservation and sustainable use for South Africa's biodiversity was also approved by Cabinet in March 2023 to provide an overarching framework to inform policies, legislation, and practices that involve biodiversity management by state and by communities. The white paper recognizes that indigenous or traditional knowledge and practices provide localized solutions to biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. It also recognizes that benefit sharing arrangements contribute to biodiversity conservation, drive transformation and redress, and promote indigenous communities' rights and benefit the holders of knowledge, of traditional knowledge. Any use or benefit that derives from traditional knowledge or practices must include fair and equitable sharing of benefits with holders of knowledge. With regard to item 6, on the sub-item on development of a new program of work, we support a new program of work that is supportive of human rights-based approach and coherent with the priorities of the Global Biodiversity Framework that addresses issues related to promoting development of traditional knowledge, access to justice and health by indigenous peoples and local communities, and safeguarding and respecting their cultures and their rights over lands. We have one text proposal to make with regard to element number 3, where it says sharing of benefits from the utilization of genetic resources, traditional knowledge, and we want to include after traditional knowledge, including traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, because our understanding is that traditional knowledge under Article 8J is not necessarily the same traditional knowledge under the Nagoya Protocol. With regard to institutional arrangements, we thank the ATEC for their work, and we consider the establishment of the body, the subsidiary body, as the best option of the 3 options going forward. The current working group could provide a firm basis for the establishment of the body. We will submit our statement in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next speaker is Norway. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Norway remains committed to supporting effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in the implementation of the CBD. The IPBES Global Assessment makes it clear that nature is under increasing pressure. Nature is, however, declining less rapidly in the territories managed by indigenous peoples and local communities embodying traditional lifestyles. The assessment underlines the importance of strengthening the rights and roles of indigenous peoples and local communities to continue managing these lands, as well as the knowledge of how to manage it. The Kunming-Montreal GBF responds to the global assessment and identifies the contributions and rights of indigenous peoples and local communities as a cross-cutting consideration in the implementation of the framework. Both the work program and the institutional arrangements for Article 8J should reflect this enhanced recognition. Norway supports establishing a permanent subsidiary body on Article 8J and related provisions. We agree with the expert group that the new institutional arrangements should preferably enhance participation mechanisms developed under the Working Group 8J, and that the full and effective participation of IPLCs in the implementation of the Convention and the GBF is paramount. However, we need to work through the details to make sure that a new permanent body will be able to deliver on the tasks at hand, and that we can agree on this at COP16. Key elements that need further work are participation, including the issue of oversight and bureau structure, organization of work, including a clear understanding on how it will operate and expected outcomes, and budget implications. We also underline that establishing a permanent body does not mean that these issues are removed from the agenda of other subsidiary bodies. On the contrary, we need to acknowledge that this is a cross-cutting issue relevant for all work under the Convention. We welcome the overall direction in the suggested work program and that it acknowledges the relevance for the work under all bodies of the Convention, including its protocols. We will suggest some text amendments to ensure that the work program does not solely refer to 2050 as the endpoint of the work program. We support the ideas expressed from the EU on this matter and the linkages to the 2030 action targets of the GBF. We also agree with Japan and Australia that the work program should await the further development of the multilateral DSI mechanism and the fund. We would be okay with a placeholder in the work program under paragraph 3, sharing of benefits. Under the heading Elements, para 1.2, regarding the establishment of grievance and redress mechanisms in support of the application of human rights approach in the implementation of the framework, we wonder what CBD decision is the basis for this. We think these ideas need further discussions. We also wonder if others see merit in identifying some core elements in the work program where the new institutional body of AHJ should have the lead. We support the suggestions from Australia to make the work program more action-oriented in this regard. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to next speaker, Mosico.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. México considera que en relación con el mandato de revisar el plan de trabajo, y en concordancia con esto, México apoya la resolución de crear un órgano subsidiario, transitar de este grupo de trabajo a un órgano subsidiario, considerando que daría un reconocimiento formal a la relevancia y papel de los pueblos indígenas en el marco del convenio, sin que por esto se vea afectado por un carácter temporal como lo sería el grupo de trabajo, que depende de la renovación del mandato constantemente. El órgano permanente puede desarrollar mecanismos para atender temas que posibilite la participación plena y efectiva de los pueblos indígenas en modalidad presencial, también en modalidad virtual y en modalidad híbrida, lo cual nos permite cerrar brechas considerables que existen dadas las condiciones diferenciadas de nuestros países. En su carácter de órgano permanente también podría contar con mejores canales para hacer recomendaciones y emitir opiniones a la conferencia de las partes, a los otros órganos e inclusive a otros convenios que tocan temas relacionados con la biodiversidad y el conocimiento tradicional. Consideramos que este mecanismo podría tener algunas de estas características: que tenga dos copresidentes o dos copresidencias, una por parte de las partes participantes y una de las representantes de los pueblos indígenas, y establecer una mesa propia integrada por representantes designados por las partes y los pueblos indígenas de todas las regiones. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mosico. Now I give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. We understand that the draft program of work as outlined in Annex 1 of document 12/5 provides a good basis for further discussions during this working group. As a crossing-cutting concern, we strongly believe that the new program of work should recognize and address the underrepresentation of indigenous peoples and local communities from developing countries in the work of the Convention. Bearing this in mind, we appreciate the balanced approach towards the three objectives of the Convention that has been proposed under the draft program. With regards to the conservation restoration section, we would highlight the need to strengthen the participation of IPLCs in spatial planning and environmental impact assessment process to enable their meaningful contribution to decision-making. We further believe additional emphasis is needed on identifying good practices to secure land tenure as an indispensable requirement to unlock the role of IPLCs in the conservation and restoration of biodiversity. Regarding the sustainable use section, we would welcome additional elements on the benefits of biodiversity-based activities, services, and products from IPLCs, which are an indispensable tool to enhance biodiversity and support their sustainable livelihoods. Further support the comprehensive section on benefit sharing. With respect to Section 4 on knowledge and culture, we would suggest revising Action 4.3 to avoid confusion on interlinkages between traditional knowledge and science-based processes under the Convention. All those relevant actions will depend on the provision of adequate means of implementation. In this regard, we would recall the historic decision, as mentioned by the Grulich statement, made by the GEF Council in Brasilia to strive to allocate 20% of the GBF fund resources to actions in indigenous territories. Regarding the section on direct access, Brazil is overall supportive of exploring modalities to promote direct access. We understand that those modalities should be implemented in a manner consistent with and through existing national policies, programs, and systems, as well as with CBD provisions and the GBF targets, in order to ensure coherence across different levels of governments and actors. We are also of the view that this section should be reframed to address funding in general, as this would allow for adequate consideration of innovative financial mechanisms, such as payment for ecosystem services. Brazil fully supports the implementation of human rights-based approaches and the strengthening of existing multilateral human rights instruments. We would therefore recommend revising Actions 1.2 and 7.2, which we believe overlap with the mandates of other UN bodies for human rights and fall outside the mandate of the Convention. Finally, concerning the institutional arrangements as outlined in Annex 2, Brazil welcomes the discussions on the establishment of subsidiary body on Article 8J. At the same time, we would flag the need to maintain coherence and consistency with the mandates of SUBSTA and SBI to avoid duplication of efforts and ensure the continuity of existing work streams under the Convention. And to finalize, we will provide some text proposals in writing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next speaker is China.
谢谢主席，感谢瑞士政府慷慨地为我们这次会议提供后勤保障，感谢秘书处的辛勤工作，为我们充分讨论8阶工作组新的工作方案和体制安排奠定了良好的工作基础。中国政府正在推进生态文明建设，制定了《非物质文化遗产保护法》、《中医药法》等一系列法律法规，支持开展生物多样性相关传统知识保护工作，促进传统知识广泛应用和会议分享。我们认为8阶工作组在前期的工作富有成效，主要是由于有一个完备的工作方案为此提供指导。如今8阶工作组完成了工作方案的全部任务内容，而我们也迎来了全新的全球生物多样性框架，即昆明蒙特利尔全球生物多样性框架。我们需要一个新的与时俱进的工作方案，因此我们支持在第5号文件的基础上继续详细讨论制定新的工作方案，支持将公约第8阶条和相关条款以及昆蒙框架的实施作为新的工作方案的目标，为全面实施昆蒙框架和第8阶条指明工作方向。谢谢主席先生。
Thank you. Next speaker is New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. Our comments pertain to Agenda Item 6. We would like to thank the ad hoc technical expert group for their consideration of the draft work program and future institutional arrangements of the Article 8J working group. New Zealand supports the intent of the new work program as well as the overall direction, which recognises the important contribution of the traditional knowledge, innovations and practices of Indigenous peoples and local communities in halting and reversing global biodiversity loss. We agree that the work program needs to be closely aligned with the GBF, and we support the added specificity and links to the relevant goals and targets. In that regard, we would like to align ourselves with the comments made by Australia and echoed by Norway, including in relation to the references to digital sequencing information, as well as ensuring the tasks are action-oriented. In relation to the establishment of a permanent subsidiary body, New Zealand is supportive. The establishment of a permanent subsidiary body would be transformative, symbolic, and a significant step forward. We note that the mechanisms of the subsidiary body should aim to ensure, at a minimum, the same level of participation and engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We further note that clarity and certainty is needed about the options available for the participation of Indigenous and peoples and local communities in the permanent subsidiary body. We look forward to considering the text proposals that have been made by parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next speaker is Switzerland.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Distinguished delegates, the strong acknowledgement by the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework of the important roles and contributions of Indigenous peoples and local communities as custodians of biodiversity and as partners in its conservation, restoration and sustainable use emphasizes the importance of the discussions we are having under this item and for the implementation of the Convention in general. Mr. Co-Chair, we will be brief and focus on item 6, on the draft program of work on Article 8J. After the adoption of the GBF last year, there is a need to focus our activities on efficient and effective implementation of the GBF. And for this, we should align our efforts under the CBD and under the other biodiversity-related conventions with the goals and targets of the KM-GBF. Therefore, and similar to Canada, Australia and others, we support the aim of aligning the program of work on Article 8J with the GBF. With regard to Annex 1 of the pre-session document under this item, similar to the EU and others, we note that while the overall timeline of the draft program of work is 2050, several elements of the draft program of work refer to specific targets of the GBF, which are to be implemented until 2030. We suggest to align the timelines of the new program of work with where relevant to the ones of the GBF and its goals and targets. With regard to element 3 on goal C and target 13 contained in Annex 1. Element 3 refers to inter alia benefit sharing and digital sequence information on genetic resource. Mr. Co-Chair, similar to Japan, Australia, Norway and New Zealand, as the Working Group on DSI will make recommendations on this issue to COP16, and as one of the issues for further consideration under item 3 of Working Group DSI is on the roles, rights and interests of IPLCs include in associated traditional knowledge, we suggest to update the relevant elements in the program of work based on the relevant outcomes of the discussions on the Working Group on DSI. Finally, Mr. Co-Chair, on options for institutional arrangements, Switzerland supports the EU, Norway and others who emphasize the need for more information on the concrete implications of the potential creation of a new permanent subsidiary body on Article 8J before making a final decision at COP16. I thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Now I give the floor to next speaker, Saudi Arabia.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. فيما يتعلق بإنشاء هيئة فرعية معنية بالمادة 8 ياء فهو بمثابة اعتراف بمدى أهمية ومركزية الشعوب الأصلية والمجتمعات المحلية والمعارف التقليدية والدور الهام لها في المحافظة على التنوع البيولوجي وإنجاح كافة الجهود المبذولة في هذا المجال. لذا فإننا نرحب وبشدة إنشاء هذه الهيئة، ونتطلع بكل تأكيد لأن تكون هذه الهيئة مكتملة العناصر والأدوار بما يخدم ويحقق الغرض الذي أنشئت من أجله ويعظم الدور المرجو منها، خصوصاً وأن إنشاء هذه الهيئة يأتي بعد خبرة وتجربة طويلة للأمانة والدول الأطراف مع الهيئة الفرعية للمشورة العلمية والتقنية والتكنولوجيا سبستا والهيئة الفرعية للتنفيذ SBI. شكراً سيد الرئيس.
Thank you for your very brief intervention. So I give the floor to next speaker, Argentina.
Gracias, señor presidente. La Argentina agradece a la Secretaría la elaboración de los documentos para los puntos 4 y 6 de la agenda. La Argentina articula la formulación e implementación de la Estrategia Nacional y su Plan de Acción a través de la Comisión Nacional Asesora para la Conservación y Utilización Sostenible de la Diversidad Biológica, que cuenta desde 2020 con la participación de representantes de pueblos indígenas en sus sesiones plenarias y mesas de trabajo. La Estrategia y Plan de Acción 2016-2020 brinda el marco institucional para las políticas públicas en materia de biodiversidad, de modo que éstas sean coordinadas e integradas en pos del desarrollo humano sostenible en el marco de una visión de desarrollo de país que integre la conservación de la biodiversidad a través de uso sustentable, con la producción sustentable, sobre la base de un territorio nacional ordenado en cuanto al uso y ocupación de sus tierras. En 2022, la Argentina extendió el plan de acción hasta el año 2024 e incorporó una serie de ejes transversales, a saber, el abordaje integral de la biodiversidad con enfoque holístico, la perspectiva de género y diversidad, el enfoque de una salud y ecosalud, el enfoque multi e intercultural de saberes, el enfoque de conocimiento científico y el enfoque de conservación inclusiva. Por otra parte, en 2022, la Argentina aprobó el Programa de Conservación Inclusiva, que en sus considerandos hace especial hincapié al artículo 8 del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica, que en sus incisos A y J refieren al establecimiento de áreas protegidas y la preservación de conocimientos tradicionales, innovaciones y prácticas de comunidades indígenas y locales, respectivamente. En tal sentido, Argentina trabaja activamente para fortalecer las alianzas con los pueblos indígenas que requieren de políticas y legislación específicas y apoyo financiero y técnico para desarrollar herramientas eficaces para conservar la diversidad biológica al tiempo que se asegure el ejercicio pleno de sus derechos. La Argentina destaca la importante discusión sobre el nuevo plan de trabajo sobre artículo 8J y otras disposiciones del convenio relacionadas con los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales y sus posibles arreglos institucionales. Con esto en mente, deseamos realizar las siguientes consideraciones y sugerencias sobre el proyecto de recomendación y el proyecto de plan de trabajo anexo. En primer lugar, la Argentina recuerda la referencia con arreglo a la legislación nacional de las partes contratantes del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica al inicio del artículo 8J y sugiere su inclusión en el párrafo operativo A4 y otras instancias donde resulte pertinente. En segundo lugar, recuerda el carácter voluntario de las guías y, por tanto, sugiere incluir la referencia voluntaria antes de cada mención a las guías en general y en particular. Tercero, estimamos que algunos conceptos requieren aclaración en cuanto a su significado y alcance, como por ejemplo mosaicos de prácticas comunitarias. Cuarto, sugerimos la eliminación del anexo 1, párrafo romano 3, 1.2, sobre mecanismos de presentación de denuncias y reparación en tanto excede el mandato del convenio, Y por el mismo motivo, sugerimos la revisión del anexo 1, párrafo 3, 5.3, sobre arreglos institucionales para formular directrices y propuestas para el establecimiento de sistemas nacionales de incentivos. Quinto, en relación al anexo 1, párrafo romano 3.4.5, estimamos necesario contar con información adicional sobre la red de puntos focales propuesta, a fin de evitar superposiciones de funciones con roles existentes. Asimismo, la Argentina remitirá algunas sugerencias de revisión del texto para ajustarse al lenguaje del marco mundial. Por último, la Argentina considera esencial evitar la superposición de mandatos con órganos subsidiarios existentes en la consideración de nuevos arreglos institucionales, al mismo tiempo priorizando la mejora de la participación de pueblos indígenas en los procesos del convenio. Las propuestas se remitirán por escrito. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. 5 minutes. Next speaker is Cuba.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Como es la primera vez que intervenimos, nos sumamos a los agradecimientos que se han estado expresando en esta sala en relación a la calidad de los documentos presentados, los esfuerzos hechos por la Secretaría y el apoyo del gobierno suizo para recibir esta reunión. Mi primer punto está relacionado con apoyar la declaración general que ha hecho GRULAC en nombre de los países de América Latina y el Caribe, donde aparecen elementos esenciales para considerar en nuestras discusiones. Por otra parte, nos gustaría llamar la atención en relación a el ítem número 4 y el documento que se ha presentado. Este documento es excelente, realmente identifica los vacíos y aquellas metas a las que no llegamos a arribar en el programa que recién termina. Por tanto, constituye un punto de partida muy importante para el nuevo programa. Debemos revisarlo exhaustivamente porque tenemos elementos importantes, tareas que comenzamos, tareas que ya tienen un esfuerzo detrás de ellos y que deben tener una continuidad. Y no en todos los casos tienen esta expresión en el nuevo programa. De igual forma, nos gustaría llamar la atención en que a nivel nacional nuestros países, específicamente mi país, a partir de la aprobación de la nueva Constitución de la República en el 2019, el papel de las comunidades locales se ha incrementado. Hoy contamos con un programa integral de desarrollo local donde la gobernanza a nivel de comunidades locales tiene una relevancia nunca antes considerada. Su participación en todos los elementos de evaluación y toma de decisión es importante. Para todos es conocido que desafortunadamente Cuba no tiene pueblos indígenas, pero sí tiene comunidades locales. En este sentido, nuestro programa de trabajo, desarrollado a través de una nueva herramienta de gobernanza, que es el marco programa de evaluación ambiental sobre el uso de los recursos naturales y el medio ambiente, tiene un eje estratégico transversal para la implementación de la Estrategia Nacional Ambiental, que contiene a su vez el Plan Nacional de Diversidad Biológica. Por tanto, el Plan Nacional está integrado a toda la política pública que implementa la política ambiental del país, como un elemento de integración y desarrollo. Y esto es una fortaleza a la hora de poder plantear los elementos relacionados con la participación e incluso con el financiamiento. Teniendo en consideración estos elementos, nos gustaría llamar la atención en dos direcciones. Primero, que el tema número 4, el tema número 6, en relación al nuevo programa, debe estar dirigido justamente a establecer medidas de acción. Debemos garantizar que nuestro nuevo programa esté justamente enfocado en la implementación de aquellos elementos que tuvimos como metas para el marco mundial para la diversidad biológica. Y en segundo lugar, nos gustaría señalar que para nosotros sería importante seguir trabajando y analizando lo relacionado con el órgano subsidiario permanente para ver su alcance, analizar su mandato y, por tanto, nuestra propuesta es seguir trabajando en esta dirección. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Next speaker is Uganda. I would like to remind you, so IUCN will be the last speaker, then we will close the list. Uganda, please.
Thank you, Chair. Uganda would like to welcome and support the program of work on Article 8J and other provisions as contained in Annex 1 of CBD-WG8j-12/5. As noted in the general principles, the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities should be ensured from the local to the global level in all stages of the identification, implementation, and monitoring of the elements of the program of work. Uganda also supports the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in decision-making related to biodiversity conservation and implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We would, however, like to propose that the word indigenous be removed from subpara number 2 under general principles in Annex 1 to leave the statement to read as the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, in particular women, girls, and young people, should be ensured from the local to the global level in all stages of the identification, implementation, and monitoring of the elements of the program of work. Similarly, we would like to propose that the word indigenous be removed from paragraph number 6 of full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities to read, to enable the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, in particular women and girls, in decision-making related to biodiversity conservation and the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We believe that this change makes more clarity and ensures inclusivity of women, girls, and young people from the IPLC's ipso facto, in line with the language of the Convention and the KMGBF. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next speaker is Togo.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Compte tenu du temps, nous allons aller rapidement sur le point 6. Monsieur le Président, compte tenu de l'importance du peuple ou des peuples autochtones et des communautés locales, et surtout dans la mise en œuvre de la Convention et de ses protocoles, il est apparu donc au fil des années nécessaire de créer un groupe de travail sur l'article 8J en vue de s'assurer donc de leur implication et de leur contribution effective. Aujourd'hui, il est clair que la contribution des peuples autochtones et des communautés locales sont incontournables si nous voulons réellement aboutir à des résultats probants dans la réalisation des objectifs du cadre. Cette situation appelle inéluctablement des réformes visant à renforcer la prise en compte des préoccupations des communautés locales dans tous les processus de prise de décision. C'est en cela que, Monsieur le Président, le Togo accueille favorablement le paragraphe 6 et 7 donc, du projet de recommandation et particulièrement donc, la création donc, de l'organe subsidiaire. Nous pensons qu'à travers cela, ça va permettre donc, de pouvoir rendre beaucoup plus pérenne donc, la prise en compte donc, de ces préoccupations donc, des communautés locales. Puisque aujourd'hui, sans cela, on pourrait aboutir à une situation où il faut à chaque fois avoir donc, un groupe de travail, ou que peut-être ce groupe de travail risquerait de devenir un groupe de travail pérenne. Alors donc, la création donc, de cet organe subsidiaire permet effectivement donc, de pouvoir rendre beaucoup plus solide donc, la prise de décision, la prise en compte donc, de ces communautés-là dans le processus de prise de décision. Il y a des arguments qui ont été bien présentés dans le document et cela est beaucoup à féliciter donc, par rapport au travail des experts du secrétariat. Nous avions également constaté qu'un travail d'analyse a été également fait par rapport à la question financière. Et cela est beaucoup appréciable à partir du moment où cela ne va pas donner lieu à des coûts supplémentaires. Pour terminer, Monsieur le Président, il y a quelques observations que le Togo a formulées, juste des observations mineures qui vont être donc transmises au secrétariat. Sur le point 4, très rapidement, nous voulons juste attirer l'attention sur le fait que la conclusion laisse encore à résider un tout peu, laisse un peu quelques failles et nous avons entendu à l'entame donc des discussions que le secrétariat estime que ce n'est pas le rapport qui va donc faire l'objet de transmission, donc nous pensons pouvoir avoir des améliorations futures par rapport à ce paragraphe. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Next speaker is India.
Thank you, Chair. This is with regard to recommendation of expert group on development of a new program of work and institutional arrangements on Article 8J and other provisions, particularly WG8j-12 /5. India fully supports the establishment of subsidiary body, which is, of course, the recognition of role of indigenous people and local communities. Particularly for India, it is local communities in their contribution to the conservation and the sustainable use of biological diversity, as well as the preservation of biodiversity in India. It will be a very efficient structure to carry out the mandate of ensuring the enhanced and strengthened participation of these communities in the process under the convention. As provided in the text, India believes that the meeting should be on rotation. It should not be in one place. Among the 7 socio-cultural regions to provide broader participation and as well as engagement from in all these regions. Similarly, when a bureau is established, there has to be equal and fair representation from these regions. And we also support, as a successful practice of working group, the subsidiary body should also have, or it should maintain the practice of appointing 2 co-chairs. And one should be representing the indigenous people and the local communities. And lastly, financing is a very important aspect for ensuring the widest possible representation and the participation, fullest participation of these communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, India. Next speaker is Bosnia and Herzegovina. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. During the preparation of last 2 NB subs in Bosnia and Herzegovina, national target related to the preservation of the traditional knowledge in the country have been identified. It should be noted that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a country with the economy in transition, which the last 30 years in expand various social change, including the abandonment of rural area and change in lifestyle. It should be also said that according to national law, indigenous people are not recognized in Bosnia and Herzegovina. On the other hand, local community transmits the entire wealth of traditional knowledge originating for the different country, different culture in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, local community and instead with a certain degree of responsibility of the state of the local environment. Nevertheless, the progress in which national goal related the need to document traditional knowledge was still not satisfactory. They lacked the capacity and the means support their target were the main barrier in their progress. However, during the past few years, the with the kind support of initiative of German government and under the leadership of UNEP, we had the opportunity to conduct the national ecosystem assessment in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Of course, this process would be incomplete without the assessment of the state of traditional knowledge, and there including the assessment of state, which we did with the kind support of UNESCO on the space of BNet. On that occasion, we provide the document both we wealth and diversity, but also the conduct laws and traditional knowledge in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We also needed that include of traditional knowledge in early stage of education in one of the good way of its long-term preservation. It is way for the all generation and local community to build their care to environment of the basis of knowledge about local biodiversity. We believe that the local community should be given a much greater role in this decision maker and implementation of coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and the national level. And update way for this some to happen on global level in establishing subsidiary body Article 8J and other provision under the aspects of CBD. Only then will support give the effort to make the implementation of coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework a task for all of science and the world government and highlight in Sector C of this plan. Thank you.
Thank you. The last party speaker is Indonesia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving Indonesia the floor. Our comments would be on Agenda 6. We have 3 comments at this stage. First, we fully support the idea that the new programs of works related to IPLC should be in line with the relevant targets under the Kunming GBF. 2, as it has been stated by many, Indonesia also needs more information on the urgency and the implications and the operationalization of the establishment of the proposed permanent subsidiary body under Article 8G. We strongly believe the importance of the engagement of IPLC, but we need more information on the reasoning why the current working group is not enough for this engagement. And 3, as we have mentioned, we need more information on the operationalization of the proposed subsidiary body. For instance, paragraph 3 of the recommendation reiterates its invitation to the parties to consider designation national focal points on Article 8G. Hence, this paragraph seems to be a voluntary one. While in its relevant annex, there is a paragraph stating that the parties should designate national focal point to follow up the work of the subsidiary body. Hence, it seems more mandatory. We need more information in this regard. Finally, Indonesia stands ready to engage and discuss this agenda in a more detailed manner. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next speaker is IUCN, but I would like to extend to another 3 stakeholders, youth, women, UNPF, II, because you request the floor for 3 times and you requested since the beginning. So NGO, would you please wait another round, not today? Thank you. Are you saying? If okay, you are on the list.
Thank you, Chair. IUCN has a long history of working with indigenous peoples and local communities, both to promote recognition of their rights and governance at the policy level and to support their conservation activities on the ground. IUCN is committed to continue supporting the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities in the work of the Convention and in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In this regard, IUCN supports the establishment of a permanent, subsidiary, and inclusive body on Article 8J and related provisions, which could play a strategic role in promoting and integrating the traditional knowledge of IPLCs in the work of the Convention and could represent, at least in part, the transformative change that we crucially need. With respect to the proposed program of work, IUCN supports its alignment with the GBF and the Gender Action Plan and reiterates the need for a human rights-based approach to its implementation and welcomes the inclusion of this element. IUCN stands ready to work with all parties, IIFB, and indigenous peoples and local communities for an ambitious program of work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to UNPFII.
Muchas gracias. Solo para precisar, hablo en nombre del Foro Permanente de las Naciones Unidas sobre cuestiones indígenas y, en primer lugar, quiero agradecer a la Secretaría por todo su trabajo y por reportar los logros obtenidos. Gracias a usted, señor presidente, por permitirme presentar el respaldo a los documentos presentados hoy. No obstante, algunas recomendaciones de precisión para aumentar su precisión, valga la redundancia. En primer lugar, me gustaría recomendarles que todo el documento se acuerde con lo adoptado en la resolución sobre derechos de los pueblos indígenas en el tercer comité del 77º periodo de sesiones de las Naciones Unidas, donde se dice que se debe utilizar pueblos indígenas con mayúsculas en todo el texto. Esto para efectos de forma que nos alinee con los avances ya logrados en las distintas esferas. En segundo lugar, en el numeral 7, me gustaría que cuando se habla de la protección plena de los defensores y defensoras de los derechos humanos, se incluya a los líderes indígenas y los defensores de los derechos humanos, tal como también se establece en la resolución 77/203 de la Asamblea General, párrafo 28. Esto también en otros párrafos ya contenidos en los proyectos de documentos. En el aparte 3, literal 1, conservación y restauración, punto número 1.4, las partes habrán de promover los derechos de los pueblos indígenas en consonancia con la Declaración de las Naciones Unidas sobre Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas, así como de las comunidades locales, y mantendría el resto del contenido del texto también de igual manera. En relación con el punto número 3.3, me gustaría reconocer la importancia de este avance y de toda forma recomendarle a la Secretaría que tenga en cuenta tratar de manera por separada tanto a pueblos indígenas como a las comunidades locales. Voy finalizando diciendo que en el punto número 3.6 leo todo el párrafo como recomiendo que quedaría. Todos los actores habrán de apoyar el desarrollo de capacidad para los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades locales y los usuarios y crear plataformas para el intercambio de información entre los pueblos indígenas, las comunidades locales y las partes, así como para el diálogo con interesados externos. Finalmente, en relación con el anexo número 2, quiero saludar la predisposición de conformar un órgano subsidiario y además que las reuniones de cada periodo entre sesiones puedan realizarse en las 7 regiones socioculturales de los pueblos indígenas, así como el procedimiento para la elección de la copresidencia. En todo caso, insisto en la necesidad de establecer previsiones para que las representaciones de los pueblos indígenas sean plenamente identificadas y distinguidas conforme lo reconocido en la Declaración de Naciones Unidas sobre los Derechos de los Pueblos Indígenas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to IPLC 15.
Señor Presidente, desde la Red de Mujeres Indígenas sobre Biodiversidad, apoyamos la declaración del Foro Internacional Indígena sobre Biodiversidad. Las mujeres indígenas somos custodias directas del conocimiento y de la conservación de la diversidad biológica. Sin embargo, en general nuestro papel y nuestra participación no se visibilizan específicamente en los diferentes documentos del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica, ya que se entiende que es suficiente al mencionar a los pueblos indígenas o a las mujeres en general. Por lo anterior, si bien consideramos que la participación de todas las mujeres es importante, proponemos que en el nuevo programa de trabajo y arreglos institucionales se mantenga la referencia específica a la participación de las mujeres y niñas indígenas. De igual forma, respaldamos la propuesta presentada por el Foro Internacional Indígena en el sentido de incluir una tarea 3.8 relacionada con mujeres y niñas indígenas y de comunidades locales, así. 3.8, las partes deben generar datos y estadísticas sobre la participación de mujeres de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales en la toma de decisiones sobre acceso a recursos y distribución de beneficios, y mejorar la participación de las mujeres a partir de estas líneas base. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Next speaker is a woman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. My name is Yesenia Hernandez, speaking on behalf of the CDB Women Caucus. The CDB Women Caucus supports the IFB and IWBN statements. We welcome the report presented as an item 4 of the agenda. However, we note with concern that in a few reports submitted by parties, no reference to engagement and actions of indigenous and local women and girls was reported. Therefore, we consider to the utmost importance to address this invisibility starting in the new program of work. To do so, in the item 6, we recommend, first, in the background section, to include a new paragraph recalling critical elements of targets 22 and 23, as well as the gender plan of action related to indigenous and local women and girls. Align the language of participation with the definition of participation in Target 22 of the Kunming-Montreal GBF that refers to the full, equitable, inclusive, effective, agenda-responsive representation and participation. Make a conscious effort to align the new program to Section C, the Target 23, and the Gender Plan of Action. Clearly include reference to indigenous and local women as applicable following paragraph 2E of the Gender Plan of Action that calls for an explicit focus on them. Critical places to refer them are paragraph 7 of the decision, then in paragraph 4 from Annex 1, as well as in the title of the element 8 of Annex 1 regarding direct access to funding, including reference to women and youth as key contributors to the implementation of the new program, for example, in paragraph 4 and 5 of the proposed decision. Strengthen the number of and the quality of partnerships and collaboration with indigenous peoples and local communities established on an ethical and equitable base on mutual respect. On the Annex 1 element section, in Section 1, Conservation and Restoration, Task 1.1, refer to all elements of Target 3, including our indigenous and traditional territories. Sustainable use highlight explicitly links between Article 10C, as it is critical to support practices of indigenous and local women essential to maintaining key ecosystem functions and biodiversity. 3, sharing of benefits. We propose the addition of 2 tasks. 3.8, parties must generate data and statistics on the participation of indigenous and local communities, women, in decision-making and access and benefit sharing. Task 3.9, develop guidance to ensure that indigenous peoples and local communities are given priority in receiving benefits directly from access and benefit sharing initiatives under the Nagoya Protocol, such as access to genetic resources and associated traditional knowledge, derivatives, and digital sequence information. 5, implementation and monitoring. In task 5.2, we propose refinement of the language of the task to highlight relevant elements of the gender plan of action linked to the nature and of the new program of work of Article 8J. 7, human rights-based approach. Ensure the application of human rights-based approach in the implementation of the new program of work, including by developing guidance and establishing specific mechanisms to, inter alia, ensure the full protection of women environmental human rights defenders from all forms of violence as per Objective 1.5 in the Gender Plan of Action. 8, direct access to funding. In the preamble of the element to add express reference to enhancing the role of collective actions.
It's 4 minutes already.
We would like to ask for the support
I give the floor to youth.
Thank you, Co-Chair. We would like to ask for the support of the parties for these relevant amendments, and we send the annex with our proposals. Thank you.
Thank you. Very brief. The last one is NGO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of Avas. Regarding item 6 on the draft new program of work, the proposed text still needs better alignment to the framework as mandated by the COP decision. For example, relevant elements like land tenure rights, especially for women, and free, prior, and informed consent are weak or missing. The elements of direct access to funding by indigenous peoples and local communities are welcome, but they still need they are still underdeveloped. Language regarding the participation should be full, effective, inclusive, and gender responsive representation and participation of indigenous peoples and local communities, as in Target 22 of the framework, and as mentioned by the distinguished delegate of Spain in representation of the European Union and its member states and the CBD Women Caucus. Avas joins the distinguished delegates in having mentioned that we need priorities for the next 2 years and 2030 in the new program. Regarding the new institutional arrangement, Avas welcomes the new subsidiary body. However, this subsidiary body should not be the only space where the full, effective, equitable, inclusive, and gender-respondent representation and participation of indigenous peoples and local communities must be ensured. They should participate in all the meetings of the Conference of the Parties, of the COPMOPs, and of the existing subsidiary bodies of the CBD. Furthermore, in the first part of paragraph 6 of section 3, procedural matters, the mandate for the subsidiary body bureau should be to involve the IPLCs and not may involve the IPLCs. So in the first part of the paragraph 6 should read, the subsidiary body, etc. The bureau should involve, delete may, representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities, delete and upon the invitation of the subsidiary body, these representatives may to serve as friends of the Bureau. Finally, we would like to reiterate the fact that indigenous peoples and local communities are actors and partners in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. To support the parties in considering our proposal, specific language and edits have been shared in the AVAS document that has been uploaded, and we thank parties for their support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I saw you request the floor, or you want to have the floor, or it's a mistake? Yes, there is another one. You want to have a special
Thank you,
intervention?
Chair. We clarified that we did not actually get the floor earlier when you called on youth. So this is the first time that we're taking out the floor on this item. Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We support the statement made by the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and the CBD Women Caucus. We emphasize that a strong program of work on Article 8J and its full implementation would greatly benefit Indigenous children and youth. We also believe that a permanent subsidiary body would bring the necessary reorientation that can put the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Convention as a whole to a transformative place that safeguards biodiversity and its stewards for present and future generations. Regarding the draft program of work, under Section 2 on General Principles, we make the following text proposal. To paragraph 7, we propose to add the words intergenerational equity after the word sustainable environment for the sentence to read, the framework contains an acknowledgement of the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, intergenerational equity, and a commitment to ensuring access to justice and information and the full protection of environmental human rights defenders. We believe intergenerational equity is a principle that is very much relevant to recall from the Global Biodiversity Framework as a guiding principle for the program of work, in the sense of its relevance for the full and effective participation of Indigenous youth as a way to consciously account for the intergenerational implications of this task on the work program. We kindly call for party support for this proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I saw another request. Since we don't have time, we already closed the list. Sorry, we could not give you the floor. Now I have stopped a little bit to consult with the Secretariat for the next step. Thank you. So first, I would like to request any party would like to support the intervention by our distinguished observers. Any party would like to support any observers? Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor.
La République démocratique du Congo voudrait à ce niveau soutenir les propositions et les déclarations faites par les groupes de femmes et des jeunes. Merci.
Thank you, it's clear. Next is Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Uganda would like to offer our support to the statement made by IFB and the CBD Women Caucus. Thank you.
Okay, noted. Next is Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. También respaldamos la declaración del grupo del caucus de mujeres y de los jóvenes también.
Thank you. Next is Togo.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. C'était juste pour soutenir également le groupe des femmes. Merci.
Thank you. Next is Colombia.
Gracias, señor presidente. Colombia quiere manifestar su apoyo a las declaraciones hechas por la Red de Mujeres Indígenas sobre Biodiversidad de Latinoamérica y del Caribe, el Caucus de Mujeres y el de Jóvenes. Gracias.
Thank you. There is no more support, so we close this session. So regarding, after consultation with the Secretariat, regarding item 4 on the progress report, document CBD/WG8j-12/3 does not include a specific recommendation. Your interventions and insights are valuable information for updating the document, which in turn will be submitted to SBI 4. After considering your valuable interventions on item 6 concerning the new program of work and the institutional arrangement, I propose the establishment of a contact group dedicated to address the proposed new program of work reflected in Annex 1 of the document and also address the future institutional arrangement and its modus operandi reflected in Annex 2 of the document. The guideline would be mandate the group to work first on POW, and then on IA. The contact group will be facilitated by Ms. Matilda Wilhelm from Sweden and Ms. Lucy Mulenke, an IPLC representative who were the co-chairs of the THEG. It is planned that the contact group will meet Monday afternoon, 3 p.m. on 13 November, and will work from a chair's text, revised according to the written views submitted to the Secretariat. Any other interested parties, including indigenous peoples and the local communities, may join. I would like to remind you to make sure that you have uploaded in your statement to the platform. Additionally, I want to respectfully remind you, given our time restraints that were contact groups are established, it is likely they will have very limited opportunities to meet and may only be able to meet once or twice. I kindly request your understanding and cooperation as we navigate this process. I will get back to you to confirm the timing and the venue for the contact group. Now we conclude our first reading on agenda item 6 and 4. I would like to turn our focus to item 5. In doing so, I am pleased to invite the Indigenous co-chair to take the lead on this item. June, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, we've made it to item 5. To open this item, I would like to invite the Secretariat to introduce the item. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding agenda item 5, knowledge management component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In Decision 1516, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary, in collaboration with parties and relevant organizations, and with the support from the informal advisory group on technical and scientific cooperation, to further develop the draft knowledge management component of the framework. The document before you, CBD/WG8j-12/4, updated draft knowledge management component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, is made available here for you. Review, after which it will be formally made available by the Executive Secretary for peer review and updated and for the consideration by the subsidiary body on implementation at its full meeting in April 2024, and by the Conference of the Parties later on at its 16th meeting. Again, please note that the draft before you is for your review. This document will be peer reviewed in the coming weeks. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. With this background information, I now open the floor for your interventions. I would like to encourage you to keep your statements short and concise and to focus on essential points. Please submit the full text to the room attendants. Where possible and in order to save time, I strongly encourage regional interventions and positions. The document before you, WG8j-12/4, updated draft knowledge management component of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, is made available here for your review, after which the Executive Secretary will make the draft available for peer review by parties. And the updated version will then be considered by the subsidiary body on implementation at its 4th meeting, and thereafter by the Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting. The floor is now open for interventions. I will take the first intervention from the IPLC group.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta. El Foro Indígena Internacional sobre Biodiversidad toma nota de la estrategia de los conocimientos para apoyar la implementación del Marco Mundial de la Biodiversidad Kunming-Montreal, lo que contribuirá a la implementación de la Meta 21, particularmente en relación a que se garantice el respeto al consentimiento libre, previo e informado, en el caso de utilización de conocimientos tradicionales, innovaciones y prácticas y tecnologías de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Los conocimientos tradicionales de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales son una columna vertebral del nuevo marco mundial, por nuestra estrecha relación entre diversidad biológica y cultural, que ha sido ampliamente reconocida por los organismos internacionales pertinentes. En tal sentido, la gestión de conocimientos es fundamental para el seguimiento y monitoreo del nuevo marco, por lo que consideramos esencial que este proceso, hasta la COP16 y las decisiones ulteriores y sus mecanismos de cumplimiento, cuenten con nuestra plena y efectiva participación. Incluido en el Grupo Asesor Oficioso sobre Cooperación Científica y Técnica, con respecto al anexo del borrador de la recomendación en cuanto a sus componentes y principios, deseamos manifestar que los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales no somos sujetos distintos con los poseedores de los conocimientos, sino que más bien somos los poseedores y titulares de tales conocimientos tradicionales de conformidad con el artículo 8, inciso J y meta 21 del nuevo marco. En cuanto a los propósitos, todos ellos son relevantes para la gestión del conocimiento del nuevo marco. Sin embargo, consideramos oportuno manifestar que, en cuanto al fortalecimiento de la comunicación, la concienciación, la creación de capacidades, el intercambio de conocimientos, entre otros, este proceso debe darse mediante mecanismos culturalmente apropiados y de manera participativa con los pueblos indígenas, incluyendo las mujeres y jóvenes, con la adecuación de las estrategias nacionales y en los informes a la Secretaría del Convenio. Finalmente, señora Presidenta, el FIB considera que es importante la gestión de conocimientos para el intercambio de conocimientos, incluso de diferentes fuentes, para permitir una mayor sinergia, pero respetando la fuente de origen de conocimientos tradicionales y reconociendo los derechos de propiedad intelectual sobre los mismos. Asimismo, que este tema es complejo y amerita un análisis más a profundidad, especialmente las cuestiones relacionadas a la protección de datos e información digital en base de datos. El FIB estará realizando contribuciones en el proceso intersessional para la cuarta reunión del órgano subsidiario de aplicación y para la misma COP16. Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies, but I would like to clarify again the terms of reference under item 6, we just closed, of the contact group. Because as you know, the terms of reference of the contact group is important to clarify the mandate of the group. I pressed my button before you closed, but it seems that I was not given the time to clarify this. The question would be, in particular, whether the contact group has mandate to discuss the new proposed permanent subsidiary body, the possibility of it, or just it is confirmed that there will be a permanent body, but we are just going to discuss the details of it. This is important because when we go to the contact group, we will refer to the chair's mandate, and we would like to clarify this to avoid us, having to fight over it in the contact group. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies, Madam Chair.
Terima kasih, Indonesia. The contact group will be tasked to address the following. For the proposed new program of work, streamline and prioritize the tasks, and to use the opportunity to improve the language editorially to make it more streamlined. And two, in relation to institutional arrangements, there seems to be some level of convergence of views. I suggest that the contact group pay special attention to the implications of burial costs, for example, and so forth. I hope that satisfies your question, Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Chair. If I may also, we think that, at least for Indonesia, we're still considering this permanent subsidiary body. So it will be very much appreciated that the discussion will be still considering the body itself, so it will not be seen as the policy to have this body is confirmed, but we are still in the discussion mode for establishing this body. If I can get this clarification, I will be satisfied. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia. We hear you, and the Secretariat has taken note of your concerns, and we will get back to you on that. Thank you. I will now open the floor to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente, pour la parole accordée. La République démocratique du Congo tient à remercier le secrétariat pour le travail fourni afin de nous permettre d'avoir ce document qui nous sert de base des échanges sur la gestion des connaissances dans le cadre mondial de la biodiversité Kunming-Montréal. Sur le point 2 de ce document, qui concerne les recommandations, la RDC constate que ce projet de recommandations sera analysé par le SBI 4 et par la COP 16. Dans ce contexte où le projet de recommandation sera analysé pendant que les SPAN B révisés et alignés au cadre mondial de la biodiversité Kunming-Montréal sont censés être déjà soumis, comment assurer la cohérence de cette stratégie avec les SPAN B au niveau national? La RDC suggère donc que notre recommandation mettant en évidence cette harmonisation soit formulée. Au point 2 de l'annexe, la RDC apprécie les 4 composantes interdépendantes de la gestion des connaissances proposées, mais constate qu'il manque de précisions sur comment les différentes composantes sont appelées à interagir entre elles. Sur le point 3, concernant le principe, au paragraphe 5, nous trouvons pertinent de mentionner que ces informations, données, connaissances, pratiques et innovations des peuples autochtones et communautés locales devront être considérées par l'IPBES dans l'élaboration des différentes évaluations de la biodiversité et des services écosystémiques. Au paragraphe 6 du point 3, les États devraient être encouragés à intégrer dans leurs systèmes éducatifs nationaux les aspects pertinents découlant des pratiques et connaissances traditionnelles. Au paragraphe 8, il faudrait encourager les parties à inventorier leurs connaissances traditionnelles nationales et au secrétariat d'étudier les modalités de mise en place d'une base de données mondiale irrélative. Enfin, au paragraphe 11, la RDC constate qu'il manque l'accès au financement. Pourtant, la mise en œuvre de cette stratégie nécessite l'accès direct des peuples autochtones et communautés locales au financement. Pour cela, la RDC demande d'inclure un point irrélatif, notamment en demandant aux institutions de certification de crédit biodiversité de prendre en compte les réalités des peuples autochtones et communautés locales dans leur méthodologie et leurs critères. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, DRC. Japan, do you have the floor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan recognizes the knowledge management is critically important for the implementation of KM-GBF and generally supports the recommendations. On the other hand, from the viewpoint of work efficiency, we would hope that the knowledge management strategy will be implemented by making maximum use of existing resources and avoiding duplication of work of related organizations and processes. In this regard, with respect to the Annex to document WG8j-12/4, we would like to suggest adding by making full use of existing resources and cooperation with relevant organizations and processes, and any new and additional activities will be conducted subject to the availability of resources. At the end of the paragraph 14, after the Conference of Parties, in the section 6, implementation of the annex. Also, we would like to request the Secretariat to clarify if additional capacity will be needed for the Secretariat to implement the proposed knowledge management strategy and any implications to the budget request for the next biennium. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan. Australia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Australia supports this meeting focusing on aspects of the knowledge component related to the traditional knowledge, innovations and practices of Indigenous peoples and local communities. We note that parties have previously had an opportunity to review the updated document in its entirety through the peer review process and will have further opportunity to comment on the strategy at the next meeting of the subsidiary body on implementation. Australia recognises the importance of fully engaging with Indigenous peoples in relation to the decisions that affect them and makes efforts to consult in line with the principles of free, prior and informed consent. Australia requests that the standard footnote be included alongside the first reference to free, prior and informed consent within the Annex Knowledge Management Strategy, which, consistent with the Mut-Kushtal voluntary guidelines and the text of the CBD, refers to the tripartite terminology and its application throughout the strategy. We will submit our proposed amendments directly to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia, for your suggestions. European Union, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora copresidenta. La Unión Europea y sus Estados miembros agradecen a la Secretaría su labor para seguir desarrollando, en colaboración con las partes y las organizaciones relevantes y con el apoyo del Grupo Asesor Informal sobre Cooperación Técnica y Científica, el borrador del componente de gestión del conocimiento del Marco Mundial sobre la Diversidad Biológica de Kunming-Montreal. Apoyamos el borrador de recomendaciones. Los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales son poseedores de importantes conocimientos, prácticas y tecnologías tradicionales para gobernar y gestionar la biodiversidad, que constituyen contribuciones críticas a la conservación, restauración y uso sostenible de la biodiversidad y a la coproducción de nuevos conocimientos para adaptarse a las nuevas realidades. Apreciamos que en el borrador del componente de gestión del conocimiento se reconozca a los pueblos indígenas y a las comunidades locales como poseedores de conocimientos tradicionales fundamentales para la conservación y el uso sostenible de la diversidad biológica. Por ello apreciamos que el conocimiento tradicional se reconozca e incluya como igualmente válido en relación a otros conocimientos, como base empírica para la aplicación del marco, y que el acceso a los conocimientos tradicionales, la innovación, las prácticas y las tecnologías de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales se dé siempre con su consentimiento libre, previo e informado. Estas áreas son prioritarias en el nuevo programa de trabajo sobre el artículo 8J que estamos desarrollando en esta reunión y nos complace observar que el nuevo programa de trabajo sobre el artículo 8J tiene potencial para contribuir y fortalecer el componente de gestión de conocimiento del marco. La Unión Europea y sus Estados miembros desearían sugerir algunas enmiendas al borrador de estrategia de gestión del conocimiento para apoyar la aplicación del marco global que figura en el anexo de la recomendación, con el fin de incluir una referencia a los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales entre los principales actores de algunas de las acciones, en particular las acciones A.B, B.B, D.F, F.B y H.A, a fin de garantizar que los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales sean tenidos en cuenta y participen en la identificación de las prioridades, necesidades y lagunas de conocimientos, los procesos de co-creación de conocimientos y los objetivos relevantes relativos a la gestión del conocimiento. También sugerimos incluir una referencia explícita en la acción HB a la necesidad o importancia de los conocimientos tradicionales para ampliar los sistemas agroalimentarios sostenibles y las prácticas de gestión sostenible de la vida silvestre. Por último, en cuanto a la implementación, hay que destacar la importancia de los gobiernos, los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales, así como de las partes interesadas relevantes, como las ciudades y el sector privado. Muchas gracias, señora copresidenta.
Thank you, EU, for your proposal. Chile, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Dado que es la primera intervención de Chile en esta reunión, queremos agradecer en primer lugar su conducción, así como elogiar a la Secretaría de la Convención y al Gobierno de Suiza por los arreglos realizados para esta reunión. Como país, reconocemos que el conocimiento es un elemento fundamental para la implementación efectiva del marco global y destacamos la contribución que la estrategia propuesta puede realizar al efecto. Valoramos la propuesta presentada en cuanto representa una posibilidad de incrementar las capacidades de gobiernos, pueblos indígenas, comunidades locales y otros actores relevantes para la gestión del conocimiento sobre biodiversidad. En tal sentido, relevamos que la estrategia ponga en el centro la participación de múltiples actores para el logro de sus objetivos y particularmente la participación efectiva de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales bajo las salvaguardas de consentimiento libre, previo e informado y promoviendo el beneficio colectivo en la conservación y transmisión de conocimientos tradicionales, elementos que consideramos prioritarios. Ahora bien, creemos relevante incorporar entre los objetivos una referencia a la movilización y el incremento sustancial de recursos financieros.
Sorry, could you slow down a bit for the interpreters?
Sorry.
Slow down.
Okay.
You have time.
Don't worry. Ahora bien, creemos relevante incorporar entre los objetivos una referencia a la movilización y el incremento sustancial de recursos financieros, priorizando y facilitando el acceso a financiamiento a pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales con especial enfoque en mujeres y jóvenes. En este punto, reconocemos especialmente la participación de las mujeres en la implementación de esta estrategia en atención a su rol como principales transmisoras del conocimiento y cultura a las nuevas generaciones. Asimismo, estimamos oportuno incluir dentro de las actividades de monitoreo las modalidades para la participación de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales en el diseño, implementación y retroalimentación de las medidas, así como el eventual acceso a beneficios. Por otra parte, coincidimos con lo planteado por el IPLC en orden a revisar con mayor detención elementos tales como propiedad intelectual y protección de datos. Por último, sugerimos también analizar con detenimiento otros elementos, como los efectos del uso de tecnologías como data mining y machine learning, a fin de resguardar adecuadamente las salvaguardas de consentimiento libre, previo e informado de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Chile. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, Canada wishes to thank the Secretariat for their work in providing a short and simplified knowledge management strategy to guide the generation, collection, organization, sharing, and utilization of relevant data, information and knowledge to help facilitate and support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Canada is supportive of the strategy in general and would only like to make a small number of remarks on its contents. Throughout the draft text, where mention of national and local capacities or entities are mentioned, Canada suggests also referring to subnational entities. We will provide our specific text insertions in writing concerning this point. We note there is an improvement from the previous version of the strategy on the inclusion and reference to traditional knowledge and indigenous peoples in the strategic objectives, actions, and main actors drafted for our review. Canada continues to support the further identification and incorporation of such references under the guidance of indigenous organizations, representatives, and other participants of the Working Group AJ meetings. As always, Canada strongly supports the inclusion of free, prior, and informed consent in the strategy, where traditional knowledge, innovation, and practices of indigenous peoples are referenced. Canada would also like to ensure that reciprocity between work of parties and indigenous peoples is included in the strategy, for example, such as the two-way flow of information and data. Again, we will provide our specific text insertions in writing concerning this point. Canada supports Section 6 of the monitoring, but reporting against the strategy should be decoupled and distinct from the monitoring of goals and targets, such as Target 21 and Section K of the framework. As such, we suggest that work is done prior to the next meeting of the SBI to strengthen the accountability and robustness of the KM strategy with a breakdown of clearer timelines through a biannual work plan associated with the KM strategy, which we will request the Executive Secretary to pursue and provide in advance of SBI 4. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, Canada, for your feedback. Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Brazil understands that as an overarching priority, the knowledge management component of the GBF must address the asymmetries in the capacities to generate biodiversity-related data, information, and knowledge. We take note with deep concern that the countries that most have biodiversity are often the ones that lack adequate technical and technological capabilities to support long-term research in the fields of biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. The knowledge management component provides an opportunity to strengthen the implementation of Article 17 of CBD, a substantially increased exchange of the results of technical, scientific, and socio-economic research, as well as information on training and surveying programs, specialized knowledge, indigenous and traditional knowledge as such, and in combination with the technologies referred to in Article 16 in paragraph 1 of the Convention. Regarding the interlinkages between the knowledge management component and Article 8J, we understand that the effective engagement and consultation with indigenous peoples is critical to enable the adequate mapping of biodiversity in a manner consistent with their needs and in line with free, fair, and informed consent procedures. In this regard, we request revising paragraph 5 and deleting the reference to traditional knowledge under this paragraph, as this reference frames traditional knowledge on equal footing as data and knowledge, and may downplay the importance of pre, prior, and informed consent. We further believe that knowledge management components would benefit from an additional strategic objective related to addressing gaps. This new objective could include specific capacity-building activities to support IPLCs and enhance their capabilities in knowledge generation. There is also an urgent need to strengthen collaboration and partnerships between universities and IPLCs in order to enhance the visibility and central role of traditional knowledge within conservation and sustainable use research programs. Beyond knowledge management itself, those initiatives can contribute to strengthen community-based monitoring. We understand additional efforts are also needed to engage databases and data users in ensuring compliance with ABS legislation on access to traditional knowledge, including where relevant community protocols, to prevent the misuse and misappropriation of traditional knowledge. We would request clarification on the concept of authority to control as proposed in paragraph 9. We understand that this authority, in the case of traditional knowledge, refers to control by IPLCs. We would request further clarification on some concepts that have been outlined with draft knowledge management components, such as change management strategy under D.E and enabling environment under G.B. We fear those concepts lack clarity and may place a disproportionate burden on biodiversity-rich countries, in particular developing countries, while neglecting the responsibilities of developed countries, where most databases are located and where the capacities for biodiversity-related knowledge production have been concentrated over decades. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil, for your feedback. China, you have the floor.
谢谢共同主席女士。中方感谢公约秘书处为准备执行昆明蒙特利尔全球生物多样性框架的知识管理战略草案所做出的努力。我们总体上欢迎这份知识管理战略，这将有助于各方查明对昆明蒙特利尔全球生物多样性框架执行的挑战和需求，提高政府及其他利益相关方在获取、管理和使用生物多样性相关数据、信息和知识的能力，保障昆蒙框架相关目标的有效实施。在此基础上，我们想提出2点建议：一是为知识管理的方法提供方向上的指引，包括数据的分类、获取、收集和管理，以确保可操作性，以及缔约方和利益相关方获得数据的协调性。二是应当确保获得的知识管理的信息是简单易懂的， 可利用公约的信息交换所、网站等平台作为工具进行分享，以确保知识资源的可获得性，并加强经验交流和能力建设，这样才能确保生物多样性相关知识的高效利用与传承。谢谢共同主席女士。
Thank you, China. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. South Africa takes note of progress made in the development of the draft knowledge management strategy. We acknowledge that support mechanisms for the implementation of the framework include knowledge generation, management, and sharing for effective decision-making and implementation, including greater protection of traditional knowledge and recognition of its contributions to the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, and promotion of biodiversity science, education, and organizational learning. South Africa has completed the establishment of a registration that houses genetic resources associated with traditional knowledge. In addition, we have also established indigenous knowledge documentation centers to record and document indigenous knowledge. We are also working with traditional landholders, leadership, and their communities to facilitate, adapt, and strengthen traditional mechanisms to conserve biodiversity in lands under communal resource ownership schemes. Through biocultural community protocols, we recognize well-established indigenous knowledge systems and governance practices, and indigenous peoples and local communities are environmental stewards of their lands. We therefore propose that development of a portal that is friendly to update NBCEPs that will describe actions that collectively add up to achieving the global targets set in the Global Biodiversity Framework should be considered. The portal should be used by indigenous and local communities to provide update on progress in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. We will submit our textual amendment proposals to the annex. Thank you very much.
Thank you, South Africa. I see no more requests from the floor. Please give me a moment to consult with the Secretariat. Hello, everyone. Oh, I see, is that women or you? Ah, okay, well, in Colombia, so I'll open the floor to Colombia first.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Sí, creo que al final pedimos la palabra un poco tarde. Colombia, solamente quisiera agradecer por el avance en este componente de gestión de conocimientos del marco global de biodiversidad Kunming-Montreal, y en línea con la meta 21 del marco global, creemos que es necesario seguir fortaleciendo el diálogo entre las diferentes instancias de conocimiento y el conocimiento tradicional. Este diálogo de saberes intercultural incluye la articulación, como hemos dicho, entre el grupo de trabajo 8J y el órgano de asesoramiento científico SOPSTA. También Colombia quisiera recomendar y resaltar la importancia de realizar consultas regionales y nacionales de este documento antes de ser adoptado en el marco del órgano subsidiario de seguimiento. Pues la propuesta se refiere a aspectos esenciales de integridad cultural y espiritual de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales. Colombia considera importante seguir trabajando en el establecimiento de mecanismos e instrumentos legales de protección nacional de los conocimientos tradicionales asociados a los recursos de la biodiversidad, tal como lo hemos acordado a nivel nacional con pueblos indígenas y afrocolombianos en nuestro Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, y especialmente en lo referente a bases de datos y temas relacionados discutidos en otros foros internacionales relevantes. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Colombia. I notice we have 3 more requests. I'd like to close that because we do have to end at 6:15 sharp. Norway, you have the floor. Keep it short and concise if possible.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a very important principle that the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities is only accessed with a free and prior informed consent. Norway suggests this be reflected in the principles of the strategy, and we'll send in our amendments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Norway. Mexico, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. México quisiera mencionar que en congruencia con el diálogo profundo sobre revitalización de las lenguas y su relación con la biodiversidad, se sugiere añadir que el material de conocimiento generado debe adaptarse a los contextos culturales y a distintas lenguas con el fin de garantizar el cumplimiento de los derechos lingüísticos de pueblos indígenas. México desea enfatizar también las salvaguardas hacia la gestión de conocimientos, prácticas y tecnologías de pueblos indígenas bajo las prioridades establecidas, como son consentimiento libre, previo e informado y enfoque de derechos humanos, así como la inclusión de la gobernanza de datos. Quisiéramos mencionar que en este sentido México ha creado la Universidad de las Lenguas Indígenas con la finalidad de recuperar los conocimientos y asimismo ha implementado otras experiencias exitosas como de la recuperación de conocimientos de los pueblos indígenas, como durante la pandemia el uso de manuales de cuidados con medicina tradicional para aliviar los síntomas por enfermedad de COVID-19. Por último, sugerimos que se incluyan el término de gobernanza de datos conforme a los principios CARE, Collective Benefit, Authority to Control, Responsibility and Ethics. Y finalmente, como sugerencia de redacción, quisiéramos sugerir que en el inciso F del aparato Components and Actors se elimine la frase Gain Access and Use, porque la meta 13 del marco global Kunming-Montreal indica que se debe garantizar la participación justa y equitativa por encima del acceso y uso de los recursos genéticos y conocimientos tradicionales. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Mexico. The women's group, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus. Indigenous and local women are rightful educators, creators, holders of specialized knowledge. This should strongly and explicitly be referenced in the updated draft knowledge management component of the GBF. We welcome the updated draft and would like to make suggestions in the recommendation section in paragraph 2 to add including Indigenous and local women after the reference to Indigenous people and local communities, to add a new paragraph as follows. invites the Technical and Scientific Cooperation Advisory Group to engage in extended dialogues, cooperation, and mutual learning with Indigenous people and local communities networks, including Indigenous and local women, for deeper understanding of traditional knowledge, management, and protection of rightful knowledge holders. To add a new paragraph as follows: requests the Secretariat to facilitate engagement of parties with the WIPO Intergovernmental Committee on Intellectual Property and Genetic Resources, Traditional Knowledge and Folklore, to ensure the protection of traditional knowledge and traditional knowledge holders in line with the Kayamentaran GBF, the new Kunming-Montreal GBF. In the annex, under Section 3, principles to align language and add references as needed, following Section C of the GBF and in subsequent sections as relevant. Further, under Section 4, purpose, we propose adding an additional paragraph as follows: increasing the consideration of diverse sources of knowledge and data and enhancing documentation and the multiple evidence-based approach as appropriate to support effective and equitable governance, integrated and participatory management of biodiversity, and to strengthen communication, awareness raising, education, monitoring, research. We would like to ask for the support of parties to these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Women's Group. I do see support from Colombia, and that's all we need. Thank you, Women's Group. Thank you so much for your excellent interventions on these agenda items. So regarding item 5, a knowledge management component of the framework, I note that the document will undergo a peer review after the working group session, which provides an additional opportunity for parties and observers to provide their valuable views and comments on the document. This document will also be submitted to SBI 4. I have asked the Secretariat to note your advice, which can be taken into account when preparing the document for peer review. I see that we have a lot of common understandings on the draft recommendation in item 5. I will prepare a conference room paper with the help of the Secretariat. I would like to remind you to make sure that you have handed in your written statements to the room attendants so that they may be taken into consideration during the preparation of draft recommendations for the 4th meeting of the SBI. Dear colleagues, thank you for your active participation and valuable contributions. Now the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
See you tomorrow.